Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 13th live airing of Conversations with Cal, a series by the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization. We are really excited to have you here today, so thank you very much for joining us. Hopefully, this isn't your first time, but if it is, welcome. I think you'll find that there's a lot to gain from this. My name is Gabriella, and I'm a small business specialist here in the OSDBU. I just want to make a few comments before I introduce my boss, who will then introduce our guest today after providing some brief updates for you. Firstly, you will notice that if you're not a presenter for this event, both your microphone and camera are muted and can't be unmuted unless done so by me. Conversations with Cal will be recorded and uploaded to our website. In the interest of time, there will be no question and answer session. But we still do want your feedback. If you have any suggestions about topics you'd like to hear more about, specific questions you'd like answered in a future session, or individuals you'd like to hear from as a small business, send us an email at small.business@ed.gov. I'll drop that in the chat soon. And we'll be happy to consider the content for this series. Also, feel free to drop a question or comment in the chat throughout the event. If we do have time, we might get to it, or we might not. Please do keep in mind that all iterations of this series are interview-based in nature. You may submit questions, like I said, during the chat, in the chat throughout the event. We may not present them based on timing and flow. Questions that aren't answered today could be answered in a follow-up session. Now that you have a better of understanding of how this is going to run, I'm going to introduce you to my boss, Calvin Mitchell, who's going to introduce the guest. Take it away, Cal.
All right. Thank you, Gabby, and thank you so much for coordinating this. I am Calvin Mitchell, and I'm the acting OSDBU Director. I recently have undertaken a new role as a Deputy Assistant Secretary for Acquisitions, Grants, and Risk Management. So I will be still possibly leading these, and I just want to start with why are we here? Oftentimes we meet small businesses and they always ask that question, how do I get started? Like, this seems so complicated? This seems so daunting. And so what we've been doing is we've really had this platform where we could interview successful businesses, and these successful businesses kind of give you the tips of the trade and how they grew their business and how they built the businesses that they have. And before you now, this our special guest, I consider Marc as a special guest. Mr. Marc.
Do I want to touch that one, Cal?
Mr. Marc Goldschmitt. He's a retired Navy reservist. He was active duty, and reserve assignments included a flight instructor, staff officer, organizational CIO, and support of major program offices, the PEOs, or program executive offices. Certified program manager, professional. He is experienced in planning and organizing all businesses process and information technology project lifecycle phases. His extensive assessment and turnaround experience includes system requirements analysis, process improvement, risk identification, mitigation and change management, infrastructure transformation, and outcome-based alternative assessment. Marc is a service-disabled veteran-owned small business. He has been intimately involved with the CVE verification program, and that's the verification program that was used for service-disabled veterans since its inception, both as a business owner and a veteran advocate. Recognized by veterans and the VA as a national verification subject matter expert. He developed his first understanding of the documentation for verification requirements and preparation. He is a veteran advocate. I feel like every time I'm out, you're out. Every time I'm at an event, you're at an event. But he is very, very involved, to include supported congressional hearings, working on veterans community stakeholder meetings. He's been conference speakers. He's been a panelist. He's been a witness. And he's also a board member of the National Veterans Small Business Coalition. But what's most important for you is how in the world he could go from one FTE or one full-time employee to over 300. That's what you want to know, is how he built this business. And so without further ado, I want to introduce you to the owner of Goldschmitt and Associates, Mr. Marc. How you doing, sir?
I'm good, Calvin. Thank you for the introduction. I couldn't have said better myself. Gabby, thank you. It's, as Cal mentioned, in the recent years, we've experienced fairly significant growth. It wasn't instant. And I can say if it was, I wouldn't be broadcasting from my home. I'd be off on some mega yacht somewhere in an exotic port with my feet up and some kind of great drink. But it really took a lot of work, a lot of planning, a lot of preparation to be foundation and build the foundation. There's a lot of learning opportunities. Some of you may know those as mistakes, errors, stupidity, misperceptions, etc. But there's probably more of those in there than I'd like to own up to. But, and as you start, you may feel as you experience those, hey, that's the end of the world. It's not. We're all starting from different places. There is no single path to success. It's a little bit different for everybody, but it's always helpful to learn from what others like myself or many of the others of you who I know are on the call would have gone through and experienced, good and bad, successful and learning experiences. So that you can apply the lessons that we've learned and essentially to what would be your specific circumstances that will change with time, with the environment, with your growth. One of the things I want to say, which I think is important for some of the things I'm going to say later, you all probably experience this also, but while we're talking, I will probably be lucky to get only 10 emails, LinkedIn invitations, or calls from scammers, business loans, ERC processors, insurance, marketing, branding, et cetera. They want to take my money. I may not get something for it. But the key things of what I want to say in here are how the heck, when you're going out looking, particularly in the beginning stage, do you differentiate yourself when you call me or anybody else as a potential partner? Differentiate yourself from those guys and those emails that we all get so that you get my interest. And now I'm ready to talk about what do we want to talk about?
Fantastic. So, Marc, first, always good to see you, my friend. Let's start with the most basic question. What made you veer into the business world and specifically GovCon? What made you choose GovCon, government contracting, for those who are new?
The first step, I think, since you put veer in there, I think since I was coming out of the Navy, stagger might be a better term. But at the time, there were there wasn't TAP. There wasn't any real process to transition or a support infrastructure. It was really, if you go back to some of the things that initiated a lot of the programs, the Vietnam War, what happened there and the occurrences there. I was a junior guy in a command by at least 10 years. Everybody told me, hey, there's no future for you in the Navy. So I was sitting there like, wow. Okay, what do I do? I really had no idea, no clue, because I was looking at probably doing the Navy as a career. Mm-hmm. And it was well short of what a career would have been. So I went out, did a little bit of research, found some folks to write a resume, went through many rounds of that. They were able to submit that to a headhunting firm that specialized in JOs for the Navy, or actually for the military. They set up a number of calls. They set up interviews. And from there, I began to facilitate who I really was in terms of the commercial world, and wound up going to IBM in Minneapolis.
Cold.
And as a salesman. And my wife's response to that was, first of all, she's from Pensacola, Florida. So you can tell what
Oh,
the first response was. The
are you
second
crazy,
response,
Mark?
it wasn't
That
that
was a
nice.
response.
Wasn't that nice? So then the second piece is I was going to be in sales, and she's like, "But you're too honest for that." So that's how I basically made the leap. Started in the world of IT, and some of that's come back to haunt me over the years.
That's awesome. So you were at IBM there in Minneapolis, and you were rocking and rolling. Why start your own business, and why federal contracting?
The federal contracting was kind of, I'd say, one of those. The truth is odder than fiction. But I mentioned my wife and how she felt about the cold, and some of the other stuff about my being in sales. And what's odder than fiction is I sat right by the call director when I was at IBM, and all the weird calls that came in that she didn't know how to handle, she passed to me. So I got a call one day. She passed it to me, and I'm talking, and about 10 minutes in, I'm like, this sounds like an interview. What's going on? I didn't do anything. So
Wow.
we wound up, okay, hey, we'll follow up. I'll schedule a visit there. I went home and told my wife, and she's like, yeah, I sent your resume off. The whole story is my mother had sent a newspaper that had wrapped a present. In the newspaper was the help wanted, and then the help wanted was a section for we want to find a electronic warfare BD guy, which fit my
Wow.
background.
Absolutely.
So she took my resume, wrote a cover letter, signed it for me, sent it off, and the next thing I know, I'm getting the phone call. So that is the I won't use the Navy term for that, but
I will tell you,
essentially,
that is a testament to someone who does not like the cold, for sure.
yeah, her criteria when we left where we were, I want to go someplace where you go from the air-conditioned house to the air-conditioned car to the air-conditioned mall, back to the air-conditioned car, and back to the air-conditioned house.
So what happened after that?
After that, there's a whole long getting into essentially the airframe aircraft, selling in the DoD and advanced technology markets, and eventually making it back down to the Washington, D.C. area, doing more of the Beltway bandit, highway helper type of roles, to get back to different pieces, which essentially started building to get me to where I'm at. It's lots of good beer stories. And I think there's lots of lessons that folks can have from some of that, but I don't think that I can keep the language clean enough for this conversation for those. So that's kind of how I do have one important thing for the first thing I did in government contracting.
Yeah.
And I think you can appreciate this in the acquisition world. The first thing I learned was never, ever, 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 ever try and cheat the government. The second thing I learned right after that was because you're entitled to more than you could ever cheat them out of. So, and really the thing there is when you start going back and looking at some of the regulations, a lot of people look at regulations as a roadblock, but they're also an enabler if you understand them and can work with them well. So it can take time to learn the nuances of how they fit together, but it's always an advantage to understand them because you get to see, one, how they are, how they will change. And when you start looking at how they're going to change, you know how to change your strategy. You're not caught by surprise and flat-footed.
Yeah, I always say you got to know the rules of the game to be able to play it, right? Or else you probably can play, but you're probably going to be pretty bad at it. And unfortunately, the consequences of being bad at it could be something that's pretty catastrophic and life-changing. So let's talk about so now you're in the metro area and you decide to start this company. Can you talk about starting the company, and can you talk about that first contract and how that came about?
I'd like to say it was my skill that brought about the first contract, but quite frankly, when I started the company, it really was a neighbor of mine. He had a requirement that he couldn't meet, so he
Wow.
passed it to me, and my first contract was with U.S. Trade and Development Agency for $10,000,
Wow.
which sent me to a second contract of $2,500, which is kind of the increments they did. But that was my first experience. I'd never done any real government services contracts before.
Wow.
So that, a couple of and some intermediate businesses between there before I really got back, I think, to where you want to go uncover and talk about things of what I've done. And I formed Goldschmitt back in '98. I had a couple of other businesses that I did in the middle. So I kind of put it on hold. Then I came back about 2010, 2011, and started doing more serious work with Goldschmitt.
Wow.
In there, you mentioned one person. As one or two people through a good portion of that. And at times it was, at that level of growth, it was very frustrating. I wanted more. I wanted to be able to do more. I wanted more. And it was, I think my idea that I knew more than I did. And if I'm so damn smart, why aren't I doing some more work?
Right.
There's a learning curve that goes with you. It doesn't matter if you're smart. You got to put the preparation in place in order to do the work, actually win the work, do the work, and then enable you to do more.
And it sounds like you did a lot of that work, right? Where you were understanding the contract process, and you were really taking your time in terms of scaling up the business. But I say all the time, sometimes you got to build the runway before the airplane comes in, right?
That was probably one of the tougher pieces, because it's, I'll say, when I started out in business, I had an expense-oriented mentality. I don't want to spend money to do this. And it comes back to, I had a good technical background, and I thought, boy, I can do all these technical things, until I started getting further and further from the technology. And because it was very small part-time type stuff, I'm not going to argue whether I was cheap or stupid by not getting the support that I really needed, but I didn't get the support that I really needed. And the business suffered in terms of being able to grow because of that. I spent so much time trying to just do something that an expert could do in an hour that it was not effective for really getting positioned for any kind of growth.
I think you had said something to me before, is you need to be able to work on the business and not so much in the business.
Correct.
Did I paraphrase that the right way?
Yeah, and that's actually something that I picked up from an SBA. It used to be called the Emerging Leaders Class, and now I think it's called Thrive. But it's one of those where if you're doing the hands-on work, you can't be out doing the marketing because they conflict.
All right.
Either the work suffers or the BD suffers.
Right.
It's really hard to try and do both. So the other piece is, because I was intimately involved in everything we were doing, it was really difficult to step back, separate myself from that, and essentially delegate, provide authorization, and have other folks manage the pieces. It was not so much a matter of learning how to trust, but it was learning how to keep my fingers out of the pie.
Wow. Yeah.
So I've got them trained right now with 2x4s. And if I start doing that, it's in a lot of cases, if I get involved in the technical, it's a decrease in productivity.
Wow.
And I think that that's common, and many people don't recognize, hey, there's time to work in the business, but not very long. You want to make that transition as quickly as possible, and it can be an extremely painful transition.
And I remember the story you told me, your first employee. Can you talk about a little bit about your first employee and how'd you how'd you get your first employee?
Which one? um, I think the key one is probably my daughter. And she'd worked for me before at a different business, picked up a lot of good information and knowledge. And I'll say that she's the one that helped me get back on the path of being more of a work on the business instead of work in the business. That she was capable of taking over a lot of those roles, a lot of that responsibility. And making that transition to her was extremely difficult for me because I'd done it all before. So it was, I think having her where she could do some of the real, the operational pieces. She was good at the operations pieces. I was good at the strategy pieces. So once I separated the two, you could start to see a growth curve start to emerge.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. I know sometimes we hear about relationships with larger companies when you're first starting out. It sounded like these small purchases were really the building blocks that helped you to really grow your business. What are your thoughts on mentorships or working with other companies? Is there anything that you would suggest around that area in terms of when companies are scaling up or growing? What are your thoughts?
I'm going to talk about mentor protege in terms of both formal and informal. Well, I think in terms of like a formal mentor protege, I started looking a long time ago at formal mentor proteges, and what I discovered very early was that in a mentor protege relationship, the mentor's doing it for their own benefit and their own good. And sometimes what you can get out of it is questionable. So you want to find good mentor relationships. If you're going to do something formal, you got to go about it the right way. It's just a way of finding partners. It's no different than you wouldn't walk into a bar and just go up to everybody one at a time and say, "Hey, you want to marry me? Hey, you want to marry me?" And that's the way I think I behaved when I first started looking for mentor protege relationships. When I finally had a formal mentor protege relationship, it looked really good until I got in. And then it was just became, instead of a strategic relationship, it became one of, hey, what are you going to do for me? It became one of, all they wanted was somebody to be a front that could bid the small business opportunities that they couldn't bid as a large business. What was I going to get out of it? I get some positions, but when I started looking at it at the end of that period, there's no way that I would be self-sufficient or be able to continue. So I looked at just leaving that relationship. As we went through the major roadblock that was there, got replaced. The new president of the company came in, and he was actually fully committed to developing my business as a viable alternative and strategic partner where I would be self-sustaining after a while and could work with and actually compete with them. So I have to say, I've experienced both from the formal, but I think that the other side is when you talked about NVSPC, you talked about some of the other associations. They have programs where you can informally mentor folks. So when you start out, you want to get that experience because you want to learn how to ask questions, learn how to ask for help, learn what some of the different opinions are. There's a lot of people have a lot of different opinions, and a lot of times don't just react because somebody says he's an expert in the SDVOSB program. Some of them aren't really experts. So, but learn both sides and make up your own mind for what you need. Start looking at some of the training that's available there. But look for the informal mentoring opportunities, which you can kind of do. There's very little investment on your part, very little cost, very little investment on the part of who's ever trying to help you. You can do targeted type things, and you got a question about anything, you can call. I give my number, but I think with the number of people on here, that could get kind of busy. But essentially, if I don't know the answer, or if you go to one of the other folks, they don't know the answer, they generally know somebody within 1 or 2 calls that can get you what you need and save you an awful lot of heartache downstream.
Yeah, it seems like to me, from my experience, is that the informal relationships are sometimes even more powerful than the more formalized partnerships. And we could talk a little bit about that, because I think it'd be good for people who are starting out and who are looking to grow. How do you find those trusted relationships? I think one thing that's very fascinating to me about the GovCon, the government contracting space, is a lot of times you're competitive mates, right? You might be competitors, but you might be partners, right? And so it's a very fascinating nuance, and I think it's because my we used to use this phrase back home, that there's always enough to eat at the table, right? And so there, as long as there's always enough to eat at the table, there's no reason to elbow your sister or to trip your brother, because everybody can eat at the table. And so can you talk a little bit about these informal partnerships that you can build, and how you go about doing it, and how it helped you, because that's what really propelled you, right, in terms of your business kind of going to that next level.
The key pieces, I think, in the informal relationships, the government business is really all about relationships and knowledge. And you need to start someplace to build them. If I'm looking at a new agency, I'd plan on something like 24 to 36 months before I felt comfortable enough to say, I can actually do something to help you. Of course, education is different. I can do that right away. But seriously, it's going to take a long time to do that. Having some friends that can help you, and essentially they need help too. Every small business out there needs prime partners. They need subcontracting partners for pretty much most of the opportunities that are there. So being able to find those and build that trust, find the people you can trust, gives you a nice long-term relationship that you can build. The I'll leave it at that.
Okay. And so these mentorships and these connections, what are your thoughts without a formal program? What are your thoughts? If you're a new business, where should they go? What should they do?
I think the best place to start is places like some of the conferences, and conferences, the luncheons, the dinners. They all have networking events, and it takes a while to understand how to do a networking event. I started out and literally started out, hi, I'm a service disabled vet. I do anything for anybody, anywhere, anytime cheap. Where's my contract? And that's the exact reaction I got. And when I'll go back to when I started out, I had a few people that were helping me, and they asked me, what do I want to do? I want to do IT. What part of IT? IT is kind of big. And it took me 11 months to get down to a reasonable niche of what I wanted to do. And I found that when I started talking to people about what I could do and had that strength to say, this is what I can do, this is what I can add, this is the difference that I can make, they started asking me, oh, can you do this? Can you do that? Can you do this? And these 5, 6, 7, 8 things that I would have put on and say, oh yeah, those are my capabilities. All of a sudden became, yes, I can do those, but I need this. So I could bracket that with reasonable caveats. And I was more credible on doing those other things than I was saying, hey, that's a core competency on my part. So very quick focus. The more focused you are, I think the faster you can start finding who's going to buy what you sell. the quicker you can start getting a contract base and start getting the past performance and experience you need to be able to go after larger and larger contracts.
Let's pull on that string now, because how many employees do you have now? You started with 2, you and your daughter. How many you have now?
We're up, I think today, 370 some.
Wow. Wow.
And then there's some other opportunities depending upon how the budget goes and what goes with that could significantly increase that.
Now, we talked about this, and before we talk about your first big contract and how that happened, right? We talked about this whole idea of advocacy, right? And we talked about the fact that as a small business, sometimes feel like they don't have a voice, right? And they don't want to, upset the apple cart, if you will. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know advocacy is very, very important to you. Can you talk a little bit about advocacy and how advocacy has helped you in terms of making sure that your small business has a voice?
There's a couple of ways to talk about that. When you first asked me the question of, do you have a voice or do you not have a voice? I think the first part of advocacy is not the voice, it's the ears. What do you get to hear? What do you get to learn? And I discovered that as I would do things within the advocacy roles, you start to see, particularly with some of the stronger advocacy groups, what's percolating in Congress, what's percolating for the regulations. And I could get sometimes up to a 2-year head start on what the environment was going to be like, what changes were going to be made. So I got to be able to go back and plan and strategize to say, okay, I can optimize around what this is going to be. I might not have had the exact time, but I know in 18 months to 24 months, this is going to happen. So I could plan and say, okay, I need a Calvin Mitchell on my staff, or I need a Gabrielle, or I need another me, who I wouldn't manage, by the way. But it's one of, that was one of the key pieces. And the other is, as you say, have a voice.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes in different ways. When you go to some of the groups, you'd find, hey, there's kind of like high school. You got the little cliques of these guys and those guys, and you got the IT guys, you got the services guys, you've got the contracting. And it's a little uncomfortable to kind of jump in the middle of some of the conversation. Mm. But after a while, you learn, you listen, you meet the folks, you talk to them individually, and they start to include you in their conversation. So you get to ask questions. Why did they do this? Why did they do that? And you can, that provides a feedback mechanism that you may not have a voice to go to Congress. You can go to congressmen, but when you go to some of the advocacy groups, those that really work with the staffs, with the congressmen, they can aggregate what you're saying and actually influence either legislation or regulation. A little bit different piece of that is, since I think most people here are probably small businesses, they get affected a lot by some of the Small Business Administration regulations. And every once in a while you may, that's stupid. Why'd they do that? I got a good piece of advice from John Klein at a dinner. And it was like, he said, while I'm up here, I want to say, tell us what you think. If you like it or if you don't like it. He said, we did one regulation and there was something we put in there. We got one comment back. Somebody didn't like it. So we changed it.
Wow.
And he said, after we changed it, I got all kinds of phone calls, letters, emails. Why did you do that? It was really great. So it's important to express an opinion when you're going in there on the regulation, on the issue. So, and if you start looking at that, you can see where folks actually can influence what you're saying. Or I'm sorry, what the regulation is going to be. A little bit different way of putting that is most of the folks in the government have not been in a I won't say most, but a lot of them that are writing the policy may not have been in small business.
Right.
unlikely that they owned a small business.
Mm-hmm.
So when you write a policy, you're writing it from what your experience is. And you may not understand the implications of, if I say this is what it means to a small business guy.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be secondary and unintended consequences. So as small business owners, you have kind of a responsibility to yourself and others in the community to go back and say, wait a minute, when you do that, here's what happens. Make them aware of the implications so that it's not, so that the regulatory piece is not a roadblock, but it's a catalyst.
A catalyst, yeah. That's good. We talked a little bit about that those first contracts and how relationships are important, right? What about your first major contract, Mark? Can you talk a little bit about that first major contract and how you went about getting it?
I've got to think about which one would be a good example. Essentially, I'm going to say I was lucky. And when I say luck, there's a saying I picked up about a week or two ago. Luck is the result of when preparation meets opportunity.
Mm.
So it was really the first really large contract I picked up was can you do this? And it was a short time to when the proposal was due.
Oh.
Prime needed a small business with certain capabilities, certain characteristics. And of course I could do it. But when I looked at it, I called my mentor at the time, and it just so happened that requirement was right in their sweet spot.
Interesting.
So we were able to go back and work with them because there are some very significant nuances about the contract that we've been able to help them through somewhat in terms of here's how you execute, here's what you do. And so we started out with we'll start off with a trial. And we did that. And I think we started with 15 or 20 people.
Mm-hmm.
And that was aggregate. We used a joint venture for that. It quickly grew to in the vicinity of about 250 to 300 people.
Wow.
And that was based upon our ability to deliver, the relationship we built with the customer, the relationships we had inside, the ability to work together as a team. So I would call that really the first major contract that we had. Since then, and we've refined how we work with the team. We've had a string of major wins in different agencies.
And so once you got your foot in the door, first we talked about getting in the door, right? That's always the hardest part, right? But building these relationships with the government buyers is the way to do it, right? But once you got the foot in the door, how were you able to sustain the growth? How were you able to sustain business once you got your foot in the door? Because I'm assuming it was the same customer.
Different customer. But,
interesting.
It's the same for each customer, though, Cal. Because I'll give an example in a minute of that. It's kind of the extreme. But essentially, you've got a contract now. You've made a commitment. You set up a series of expectations with the customer. So it really is getting the team engaged to meet and exceed the expectations, and build those relationships with the customer. It's probably as much or more the business side and the policy side as it is the technical side. Technical doesn't win you very much. And it enables you to do things, but it's really in the how does a customer do business? What do they do? Knowing that you're going to face this challenge as you go forth. So it was really getting the team engaged and committed to the customer and their mission. And I don't mean it as a platitude. I mean they were engaged, and gained the credibility and trust of the customer, and more work started coming our way.
That's awesome. I also often get this question about the importance of certification. I know you're service disabled, veteran-owned small business, and I know there's a host of other certifications that you can get, both professional and SBA. Did any of those things help you in terms of capturing contracts? And you want to talk a little bit about that? Is that something that people should pursue? We talked a little bit earlier. You said that, hey, I was a service disabled veteran-owned small business, and I chuckled, right? But how does this help? Does it hurt? What's your perspective?
There's two ways to look at certifications. One is a checkbox for a procurement. And, there's a lot of companies that'll sell you essentially something that'll get you a certification. And what that means is you're now out some cash that you get to pay yearly to renew and to renew and to renew. As far as a business perspective, it doesn't do squat for you. Where it becomes important, if you take something like an ISO 9000, 2015, any of the ISO, CMMI, having the certification is not the significant piece. It's being able to build it into your business process and your business practices to help streamline, make your business more efficient, make it more effective. So when you can start to apply that to say, okay, I can do that now for this opportunity, I'm going to have a better product. I'm going to have a more efficient product. And what comes out of that is better CPARs, better relationship, so growth within the customer, and also the ability to go to the next opportunity and say, not, hey, I got CMMI 3. That's a, whoopee-doo. But the CMMI 3, if I demonstrate that I've got that process in place and it actually means something, it makes for a stronger past performance. It makes for a stronger proposal, and a better performance with the customer.
So I'm going to veer off a little bit, or stumble off. We talked about past performance in times past. How important is past performance? And I know SBA has created a new rule so that if you're a subcontractor, that you can get past performance from the prime. Can you talk about how the importance of past performance and how, as a small business, you should look at past performance as you're starting to scale up and grow your business?
I'll put that in the context of the growth curve, because when we didn't have past performance, we didn't have very much success with proposals. You might scratch a few things out, and some of it was we just looked at things that were too big. But as we started to get relevant, so we started to target opportunities that would give us relevant past performance, and the past performance was the goal, not necessarily having a gigantic margin. Because let's build the pieces that we need to be able to demonstrate that we can do the work. And as we started building a stable of past performance with strong ratings, CPARs and ratings from the customer, you can start to see a very significant growth in the number of proposals we were successful winning, as well as the size of the efforts that we were successful winning. So I think it's a key foundational piece that is not kind of haphazard. Yeah, I've got to have any contract. You need to focus on the things you need to sustain the business, but really to support what your strategy is, how you're going to get there. Because if you got a strategy for here and your past performance is here, good luck.
That's good. Being intentional, right? I think we talked a little bit about this earlier, where you highlighted, you don't really want to chase after everything, right? You do want to be cautious in what you pursue. Because not every contract's a good contract, right? Or every client's not a good client. Not every prime is a good prime. Have you ever had a difficult prime or client, and how did you navigate that?
I think the question is how many have I had? And I lost count. And there's a lot of ways to look at a difficult client.
Yeah.
And some of it is that you may have a different, from a business perspective, a different business cultural background. Examples are things where you may be dealing with a customer that's process oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And very much just methodical, do A, do B, do C. They want a checklist. Whereas what you're doing is you're trying to sell them something that's a significant business advantage. You're never going to close that gap. You're never going to get them to come over and say, okay, let's look at the business piece. Let's look at the business value. It could be you're talking to a technical guy and you're not a technical guy. I'm trying to wow you on how smart I am technically. It ain't there. You'll pick that up very quickly. You may be talking to a senior exec and talking down in the weeds, great stuff down in the weeds, but you're not going to get that message across. Right. So there could be different ways in the communication area where you may have a problem communicating, and it may not be the customer that's difficult. It may be you.
Wow.
The other side of that is, in a lot of cases, a lot of the stuff for how you acquire, how you manage, is word of mouth that you've picked up OJT, and it's kind of like the telephone game. You start with one piece, and by the time you get around to the end, it's something completely different. So how how the customer may not know how to manage. They may have to say, oh, okay, this is how you do things. And sometimes you can't correct that. And other times, I think it's just what I think you were probably referring to. They're a real a-hole. And there's nothing you can do. That's the way they're going to be. In that case, I think you need to look at what's the opportunity cost of me staying there. That can be very painful. So you have to learn how to fire a customer if they're not the right customer. Does that answer your question, Sir Cal?
It does. It does. But it also leads me to another thought. I can imagine that it would be very difficult trying to determine what to pursue, what not to pursue. What advice would you give a small business as they're trying to determine what opportunities to pursue? Right? We had one guy, and he's like, I compete on everything, right? And basically there was no bad deal. Right. And it was an interesting perspective. And there were other people who had a very different perspective. What are your thoughts?
I think that depends. We break that into value add and commodity. Commodity, you can take that perspective a little bit easier. It's really going to be what can you deliver at what price, what time, et cetera. When you start getting into services, hopefully a lot of folks are getting away from LPTA, and they're getting more into a value add, but even there, it's your investment shouldn't be in the proposal initially. Your investment should be, let's go through the OSDBU. Let's go find who buys this stuff and what do they really need. It might be looking at what are the problems within the agency and doing that research 2 or 3 years before the RFP comes out, so that you've got a knowledge of the requirements, a knowledge of the culture, and you can be responsive. When you start getting to that point, you can say, yes, I think I can now be, whether you want to call it procurement ready or business ready, I'm in a position where I can have a high enough probability of win that I can pick that up and I know that I can do the work and deliver. It's an oversimplification, but essentially, you need to start to develop some criteria that are objective. Do I know the customer? How long have I dealt with a customer? And there's lots of lists of the proverbial 20 questions. And it's picking one that works for you and being able to say, okay, I may not be there now, but if I invest money in developing this in my capture plan, can I get to the point where I'm basically the preferred vendor? If you can get there, you go pursue it. If you can't, you make the decision early and don't waste your money bidding 50 things. You get the hell out of there and just focus on a smaller number that you can win rather than a larger number that you can bid.
And it doesn't sound like something that happens overnight, Mark. It sounds like these relationships may take a while. Is that true?
It took me a long time. It's a difficult thing sometimes for some folks to say, to differentiate between I can do that work, which is pretty broad, and you probably can, to I can win that work, to I can perform that work. And if you got to have all of those pieces lined up, if you win it, you got to perform it. And you need maybe you need financing. Maybe you need a specific set of people. And the earlier, see, my dog agrees. The earlier, yeah, the earlier you can get started with that, the better the probability is you'll find out I can do it or I can't do it before you invest a lot of money.
Yeah. I think that's really good advice. I think it's amazing. Oh, go ahead. I think it's amazing. Oftentimes, it's really difficult to really navigate the space. But I think the nuance and the importance of the relationships and having some intel is very important. But I think that the one thing that really is clear to me is that sometimes small businesses, or any businesses in particular, probably not so much large businesses, they assume that the government's always right, and that we've got all the solutions, right? And quite frankly, we need advice, and we're looking for this technical expertise. And you outlined it very well as to how that that's part of your value, right? That's part of that business proposition, right? Is that you're providing this expertise that's not shielded or blinded, which we can be sometimes in the government based upon our limited technologies and some of the other things that kind of put us at a disadvantage in terms of innovation and so on and so forth. And I know IT technology is your field. And I guess on the next time we talk, we're going to explore that a little bit more because you're competing with some of the largest businesses in the space. And I think it'll be good for businesses to hear how did you get to that place, and what are some of the tips that you would give as you are as people are looking at, hey, you know what, I'm growing. What happens from here? And so we'll discuss that next time. And so we'll leave you hanging on the thread for the next conversations with Cal. And then right on cue is Miss Epstein to close us out.
This has been a really great conversation. I really enjoyed listening in, and I know that a lot of our audience members did as well. So really looking forward and hoping to have you on again to keep exploring this further. But again, yes, thank you so much for participating. Just a note to the audience, we are in the process of finalizing some of our videos from before to upload to YouTube. I know you've been waiting for them. So hopefully you will be seeing those soon, and we will send an announcement when that happens. But again, thanks for coming. Have a great rest of your day and a great weekend.